Okay. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Pei Aleph. We started the amazing sugya yesterday on Daf Pei Amid Beis. Firstly, when the person, the owner, who's trying to bring the Pesach Rishon, similarly the Nazir, who concluded his days of Nazirus and is bringing the final Karbanos, if it turns out that they are Tameh during that Avodah, since they are not fit, the one who's making the Pesach, since the Nazir became Tameh, so all of the days of his Nazirus is completely taken away, so their Karban is invalid. However, Halacha l'Moshe Misinai is that if their Tumah came from corpse Tumah, but the corpse was in a location that no one knew in the past, certainly not for certainty, that there was ever Tumah there, this is called Tumas Tahaim, the Tumah of the deep. Even though they discovered that indeed they were Tameh, they are allowed to rely on the power of the Tzitz Meratza, and this person will not have to bring a Pesach Sheni. And the Nazir successfully completed his or her days of Nazirus. Step number one. We had an inquiry. We began the boya on Daf Pei Amid Beis, whether we apply this tremendous koyach that sits is meratza for Tumas HaTahaim when it comes to any kohen doing the avodah. Now I know that by karbanos tzibur, a karban tzibur can be done betuma, whether it's tchuya, whether it's sutra. But just to know the rule, if a kohen is tamei while this kohen was doing the avodah of a yachid, generally the rule is the avodah is completely invalidated. So here we want to know whether we can apply this dispensation, this leniency, that if the Tumah came from Tumas HaTahaim, then you can rely on the tzitz and the avodah should be accepted. Do we apply that to the kohen or not? That's the boy. Now we quoted the brayse from Rabbi. Rabbi was really an Amoira, but he taught brayses. The Tanach Devei Rabbi says that Tumas HaTahaim is only for Tumas Meis. The leniency, the dispensation of Tumas HaTahaim, and we're trying to clarify what exactly is he excluding. And where we left off is that he's not, the kohen is b'chlal not shayach to Tumas HaTahaim. There's no leniency. The nakuda of this statement is that there is no dispensation of Tumas HaTahaim by ziva. Now for this, let's quickly review the laws of a zav, and we will also have to review bekitzer, the laws of a nida and a zav ketana and a zav gedola, to better appreciate the first part of today's share. So if a person has a normal seminal emission, this person is called a balkeri, the person is tamei. On a level of a rishon, the person has to go to the mikvah, and at night, head of shemesh, the person is completely purified. And the same is true if any zera leaves a woman after she had a relation with a man, that also will render her tamei on the level of a balkeri, and she goes to the mikvah, and at night she's tahira. Now, there's a certain type of seminal emission that Chazal called a ziva emission. And in Nida, we learn details about it, both that it leaves the body unusually without a kishoy, without an erection. Also, the zera, the semen itself, in its texture is different than healthy zera. Whatever that is, if a person has a ziva emission, having once will render the person just as tamei as on the level of a balkeri. However, if the person has two such emissions, whether they were on 2 consecutive days or whether they were even on the same day, now there are many other detailed rules that we're not speaking out now, but just generally the rule. Now the person becomes a zav, for which he has to count 7 clean days, during which he's making sure that he's not having any more of such emissions, because if he has any more of such an emission, it's going to completely take away all of the days that he counted. He'll have to start counting from tonight, from tomorrow, all 7 clean days. On the 7th day, he goes to a Mayim Chayim mikvah. He doesn't have to wait until the night, but he may not have any more emissions until that night. Because even after he went to the mikvah, if he's going to have another emission, then according to those who say that all of the prior days are discounted, all of the prior days are discounted. Now, if such a person had a 3rd emission, whether the 3rd emission was on the same day or on 2 consecutive days, or even 1 a day, as long as they are 3 consecutive days, then there's another detail. Not only is this person a zav, but even after going to the mikvah on the 7th day and waiting until night, still you're not completely out of your tumah. You are mechused kippurim. You have to bring karbanos on the 8th day. Now, let me go to the din of a nida. from when the woman has her period for the first time, she opens up a cycle of 7 and 11. Biblically, that means, even though that nowadays we practice the Gavaldike laws of Taras HaMishpacha based on Amar Rab Zera, B'nois Yisrael, Chmiru Al Atzman, Dasharafilo Royas Tipas Dam Kechardo, their Yesheva Shivas Nekiyim, we'll translate that in more elaborately many other times. But the way these laws are on a biblical level is that when a woman sees Dam, she begins her days of Nida. During the days of Nida, she can have a flow for the whole 7 days, as long as the flow stopped before the end of the 7th day, and she makes a proper hefsek tara. Then at night, she goes to the mikvah. These are the few people that biblically go to the mikvah dafka at night, a Nida, not a zava, and she can be with her husband. But if she sees blood during the next 11 days, whether she sees it on the 8th day, whether on the 9th day, no, it's 7 days, the subsequent 11 days, if she sees dam, if she sees blood on one day, then she's tameya that day, and then she's shoymeres yom keneged yom. The next day, she has to make sure that she has no more bleeding, and she goes to the mikvah during the day on that shoymeres yom keneged yom. And if until the end of the day, indeed, she sees no more dam, then at night she's tohoyda muteres labaylo. If she sees blood on 2 consecutive days, she's still a zava ketana. She only has to wait 1 full clean day on the day she goes to the mikvah. And if she doesn't see dam, then she's good to go at night. She's muteres labayla, as well as the dinim of tuma lifer. But if she sees blood dafk on 3 consecutive days, not 3 times on the same day, not like by the zov. By the woman, it's dafk on 3 separate days. They have to be consecutive. Then she becomes a zova gedola. Here's where she needs to have 7 complete clean days. She goes to the mikvah during the day, also even by a zova gedola, and at night she's muteres labayla, and she has to bring the karbanos of a zova on her 8th day. Now, tumas atahoim by the zova would mean that if when they went to the mikvah, the man, they don't have any emission today. He's a zova. It's the 7th day. He's good. The woman on her shemeres yom keneged yom, while she went to the mikvah, she doesn't see any blood. Will she see blood until the end of the day? We don't know. No one knows. That's called the tumah of the depth. Now, indeed, what were to happen if she will see dam later, or if the man will see another emission later? Now, normally we say that when they see this emission, it retroactively takes away all of the clean days that they were counting. Now, let's go to our case of Pesach. That's where we left off yesterday. So a man, the 7th day of the count of Zav is on the 14th. He registered. They brought a carbon Pesach. He already went to the mikvah. If Hitaka will not see any more emissions until that evening, he will be allowed to eat a carbon Pesach, and he's mamish lechatchila good to go. He fulfilled his obligation. But if in between, after the mikvah, but before nightfall, before he ate during the day, he has this another emission, this is called, he became tamei with a ziva tumas tohoim, because no one knew when the carbon Pesach was slaughtered that he will have such an emission or not. If we were to say that the tzitz is meratza for tumas tohoim of zivus, even though he becomes tamei retroactively, that means that now it comes out that when they brought the carbon, he was not fit. It doesn't matter, even though he cannot eat it. But when the carbon was brought, you can rely on tzitz meratza, and he will not have to bring the carbon Pesach Sheni. Where we left off is that tumas tohoim by zivus cannot have the dispensation relying on the tzitz. Yes, he will have to bring the carbon Pesach Sheni. That's where we left off. And I know it's a long intro, but we have to have that clear. And today, in the beginning of the daf, we're going to challenge that. We're going to show that that if a person has a ziva emission after he brought the carbon, then that person will fulfill his obligation. He will not have to bring a carbon Pesach Sheni, but as the Gemara will explain, that's not because this opinion, Rabbi Yossi subscribes that tumas hatohoim of zivus is something that we can rely on the tzitz meratza, but that's because there's another whole shita, which is that both in the case of the man that we mentioned, that he goes to the mikvah on the 7th day, but then later he has an emission. Or a woman, while she is a shemeres yom keneged yom, she goes to the mikvah, but until the end of the day she sees blood. There are those who opine that he only becomes tamei from now onwards. It's not retroactive. And even though you have to have 7 clean days, you didn't have 7 clean days. But there's a concept in halacha that they apply over here known as mixas hayoim kekuloi, that a sum of the day is tantamount to the entirety of the day. For example, by Shiva, God forbid, we know that we don't sit 7 full days. we apply that as long as you sat Shiva in the beginning of the 7th day, Shloishim in the beginning of the 7th day, Mixas Hayoim Kekulai, we will actually see, according to Rashi and many others, that Mixas Hayoim Kekulai, according to these opinions, doesn't mean in the beginning of the morning, but as long as at night they were clean, then we consider them already having their entire Shemeres Yoim, or their entire 7th day. And yes, they become Tamei. It's like they're seeing something new, with all the details that we will learn, God willing, on Daf Pei Aleph. Now, we're going to learn interesting klalim, that, for example, one may not make a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and we will conclude on Daf Pei Aleph that these laws that we began speaking out, that when it comes to the Nazir, when it comes to the Oisa Pesach, that they may not be Tamei, but there is an exception, which is that if they became Tamei, Tumas Meis from Tumas Atohoim, then yes, Tzitz Meratza, that is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and therefore, based on the principle that you cannot learn a rational kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, we will not be able to extend it further. Interestingly, the boya that we mentioned, whether a kohen who's doing an avodah v'yachid, whether he can rely on the tzitz meratza by tumas atohaim, is something that the Gemara will not successfully prove one side or the other. Nevertheless, we'll come to the maskana, we'll speak out, God willing, how the Rambam, understanding there's a rule, halacha ki im tim solaymar, because we're going to have another boya that's im tim solaymar, and we're going to paskin indeed leniently like the im tim solaymar, and like the subsequent detailed question. And just at the end, God willing, on Daf Pei Aleph from the base, we're going to have the new Mishnah. The new Mishnah is going to speak about a carbon Pesach here, but it's really a broader question. Whenever any consecrated kachim, meat, becomes, or any part of a carbon becomes invalidated and you have to burn it, where do you need to burn it? Now, I know we spoke this out a few daf ago, and the rule is that it has to be burnt in the same location. Had it be fit, it would have been consumed. So kachei kachim that become puzzle have to be burned in the azara, lifnim and akloim. Kachei kalim have to be burned in Yerushalayim. And the final detail, if you are burning something that has to be burnt in Yerushalayim, but you are choosing not to burn it in your backyard, not on your roof, but if you are burning it on Harabayis, that's called before the palace, then you are allowed to use the woods that were donated to be used for the pyre. You are allowed to use Atzei Maracha to burn the Psulei Hamikdashim. Wow. Okay, Chevra, let's go. We left off 2 lines on the bottom of Peyam and Beis. These are important. I know there's a lot of halachas, but they will indeed be very important to learn, as they are going to be repeated again and again, particularly when we're going to learn Mesechtes Nida v'chuli. So 2 lines before the bottom. So the last statement we made is that Baraitza, the Tani, the Veid Abchia, that's the way we did not allow ourselves to bring any rayas from the Tani, the Veid Abchia. He was not referring to a kohen Tumas Sheretz, because maybe what he meant to say that Tumas Atohoim is only for Tumas Meis is to tell you, and it's not going to be helpful for the Tumas Hatohoim Deziva. So if this Zav has an emission after the Korban Pesach, before the night, he will have to bring Korban Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara says that's not true. That Tumas Hatohoim Deziva loy meratza. Are you telling me that indeed if someone is on the 7th day of the clean days of Zav and the Korban, and he brings the Korban, he went to the mikvah. But if he has another emission before the night, are you telling me that he will have to bring a Pesach Sheni? It's not true. We're going to quote a Tana, V'hatanya, the last line in the Amid, Rabbi Yosi Omer, and we're comparing, and it's taka the same. The Zav during the 7 clean days, including the 7th day, even after the mikvah. Similar to the woman during the 11 days, 7 nida, 11, 7, 11. The 11 days when if she sees dam, she will have a status of a zava, that if she only sees dam 1 day or on 2 consecutive days, she only has to count 1 clean day. And that day is called Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom. And her Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom was on the 14th. And she went to the mikvah. Guys, the only woman that goes to the mikvah at night, not nowadays, now always a woman goes to the mikvah at night, because we bring the chumras of everything together. We bring the chumrah of Zava. She has to have Shivas Nekiyim, like a Zava Gedoyla, even though she only saw a drop of blood. And on the other hand, when does she go to the mikvah? Like a Nida. A Nida has to go to the mikvah at night, not during the day. But biblically, Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom needs 1 clean day. She goes to the mikvah on the day, and the Korban Pesach was slaughtered for her, whether she's obligated to bring the Korban Pesach or whether it's optional, but she was part of it. And now, V'zarko Leha, Sheshachat V'zarko Daf Pei Aleph, Basheni Shila, all right, on the sheni, or no, it's her second day, meaning on her clean day. That's the meaning here on their second day. Whether it's she saw dam on one day and now she's counting the second day. Same thing would be if she saw dam for 2 days, she only has to count one clean day. The point is that the one clean day is on the 14th, and then v'achar asa. And again, we are calling any tumah which prior to it no one ever knew whether she'll become tamei as tahoim tumah. So says Rabbi Yossi, einoi chalos. On one hand, she may not eat. And guys, let's make it clear, going back to the Mishnah, even when we say that tumas atohoim, by a man, by a nazir, by a Pesach, is tzitz menatzah, it never means that they can eat it. Never means, it just means that even though the shechita needs to be done by a Pesach on someone who's fit, it's as if he was fit. So this is no problem. She can't eat it. But here's the chiddush: upeturim alasas Pesach sheni. Not like we just said that the Braisa Torah the Veit Abchia means to say atumas atohaim only is good for tumas meis, but it doesn't affect atonement for tumas tohaim of ziva. Clearly, Rabbi Yossi says that this woman is exempt from making a Pesach sheni, and my tama lav mishum tzitz menatzah. So yes, tzitz menatzah even for tumas atohaim. So the Gemara says no. Amri, they said nah. You don't understand Rabbi Yossi. Really, Rabbi Yossi, everyone holds that tumas atohaim, right, of zivus won't be covered up or won't be resolved relying on the power of the tzitz. The reason why Rabbi Yossi says that she's exempt from Pesach Sheni, loy mishum de kasav Rabbi Yossi, that when she was on her shemeres yoim, since miktsas hayoim was clean, so even if she sees later in the day another seeing of blood, it's as if she's beginning a new tumah. Which means that when the Korban Pesach was geschachten for her, she was completely tahira. He doesn't say that if you see a zivus on the 7th day, or if the woman sees on her shemeres yoim blood, it retroactively nullifies the clean day. He does not subscribe to that. Now, we don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yossi holds that only mikano lahabahim etamam. Now, there's a big question here. If you hold mixas hayom kakulay, let me ask you a simple question. How can a woman ever become a Zava Gedola? In other words, if she sees dam on the first day, but if in the beginning of the second day, in the beginning, she didn't see dam, and we are saying, Rabbi Yossi holds mixas hayoim kakulai, so even if she sees dam on the second day, why don't we view that as the beginning of another Re'iyah? Why do they combine? The Gemara is going to ask this here soon. Okay, says the Gemara about Tanya, are you telling me that's Rabbi Yossi? It says in a Braisa, Rabbi Yossi Yomer, Zov Bal Shtei De'iyos. The only difference is that he doesn't have to bring the kippurim on the 8th day, but he has to have 7 clean days. Saying this is what we spoke at the end of the shiur yesterday. And during that time, he was clean. He even went to the mikveh. However, but if in between the mikveh, until the night, he has another emission, and the same will be by Yishemeres Yom Keneged Yoim. Sheshachtu, we're speaking about the Pesach, and the Zarkola Basheni Shelo, Varchakach Ro'ason, says Rabbi Yossi, what happens to all of the items that these people sat on or laid on? We're speaking about a unique stringency that Zav and Azava impart Tuma Mishkavu Moishav, making the item upon which they sat or laid upon Tamei on their level of an Av, Harei L'Metamen Mishkavu Moishav Limafreya. Clearly, it's not Mikano Lahaba. It is a retroactive Tumah, and yet, Upeturim Masa is Pesach Sheni. That must be because Tzmaratza al Tumah Satohaim, because they do hold of retroactive Tumah, which is the way we learn. So the Gemara says, no. I hear the Braisa, I'm standing our ground. Rabbi Yossi holds that Azav and Azava, if they have this emission on their final day, it's a new sighting. It's not retroactive. It says that they are metama, everything they sat upon or laid upon retroactively. That's only midrabanan. That's only midrabanan. And therefore, again, when they say peturim alasos pesach sheni, that's because the rabbanan did not apply this chumrah of retroactive rabbinic tumah. As far as Pesach is concerned, they left the law the way it is biblically, and biblically it's a new re'iyah. And therefore, tumas hatohaim, we can stand by that, is not helped through the tzitz by ziva. Tumas hatohaim the ziva tzitz einemeratz. And now the Gemara says, "Va'af Rabbi Oishia also holds, like Rabbi Chia, that Rabbi Yossi holds, Rabbi Oishia is an Amoira. He holds, it means he holds that Rabbi Yossi holds that Metama L'Mafreya only Midrabanon. And now we have the Tanya Rabbi Oishia Oimed. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oishia, very much like Rav. They lived in the beginning of the era, right? Rabbi Chia is Rav's uncle, right? But they lived in the beginning of the era of the Amoraim. They're not considered Tanoim. And therefore, if you look on the side, he writes, Yitochen liyos the Amar Rabbi Oishia. Even though Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oishia organized braises, but never will you find in a braisa the braisa quoting the sheet of Rabbi Oishia. So therefore, we have this amendation. So let's go to Amar Rabbi Oishia, or it's either the Tanya Rabbi Oishia Omer or the Amar Rabbi Oishia Avol Zav Shirah B'Shvi Shaloi Soiset Eshelofanav. That's statement number one. No, that's the way we normally learn. So if a Zav is counting 7 days, he already counted 6 days. Now it's the 7th day. If he sees another Ziva emission, if he has a Zivus emission, he doesn't only lose that day, he loses all the 6 days prior. So Amalei Rabbi Yechanan, why do you say that? Lo Yistad Ela Yoimei. Let him only lose 1 day. Now that would mean that Rabbi Yechanan would be saying that he doesn't lose the 6 days, but he does lose this day, which means he'll need to add 1 more day tomorrow to compensate for today. And now the Gemara interrupts, like Mimanavshach. Either you hold Lamafreya or you hold Mixas Ayem Kekuli. Mimanavshach. Ikas of Lamafreya Metame, then I feel a Kulanista, which is L'chayda what Rabbi Shai is saying, right? That's Soiset Eshelofanav. If you, Rabbi Yechanan, are bringing up an opinion that holds otherwise, which will be that only Mikanu Lahabu Metamo, and therefore that's linked with Mixas Ayem Kekuloi. So if you subscribe to Mixas Ayem Kekuloi, why would you have to count tomorrow a clean day? You already had today, the beginning of today, Mixas Ayem Kekuloi, Yom Enami Lo Nistar. So the Gemara says, indeed, what Rabbi Yechanan meant to challenge Rabbi Shaya was Ela Ema, that Rabbi Yechanan says, V'lo Yistar V'lo Yoimei. Okay. And V'amalei, so Rabbi Shaya tells Rabbi Yechanan that, well, by the way, what you're saying is good. You, Rabbi Yechanan, are asking, why don't you say Mixas Ayem Kekuloi? And a Chanami. Rabbi Yossi Koi Kavasach. Period. Elama, I'm not quoting Shitas Rabbi Yossi. End of back and forth. Now the Gemara brings a beautiful proof. Didn't we just say V'ha Rabbi Yossi Oimen B'tamen Mishka V'Moshev Lim Mafreya? How can you say Rabbi Yossi Savar Kavasach that Mikanu Lahava when the Braisa says that Rabbi Yossi says that it goes retroactive? Elolav Shmamina. As far as Tumah is concerned, then rabbinically it's Lamafreya. But as far as biblical is concerned, Rabbi Yossi holds both by the Zava, by the woman, and by the man, that it's only Mikano Lahaba, and we apply Mixas Ayem Kekuloi. Okay, so really, according to Rabbi Yossi, we're back to the boy over here. Because we don't know whether tzitz is meratza or not. It's irrelevant. By Tumas Atohaim de Zivus. Let's go back to the boy. How did all this begin? The question is, if a kohen is tamei, can the kohen rely, if he's tamei because of Tumas Atohaim, can you apply tzitz meratza for the kohen as well? And that has everything to do with the understanding the Tanach Rabbi Chia when he says, tzitz Tumas Atohaim is only for a mace. What was he excluding? And if you remember yesterday, we says he must be excluding sheretz by the kohen, which means mace for the kohen does work. Now, Rabbi Yossi has to the Amikanalav Mitamam. So let's go back to the understanding of the Braisa of Rabbi Chia. When the Braisa says that Tumas Atohaim is only Lameis Bulvad, so what is he excluding? And at the end of yesterday's Amud on Pei Amud Beis, we went through all the options. It cannot go to the Nazir, it cannot go to the Oisa Pesach. L'chayra, Nifshad Mina, that it's referring to the Kohen, and V'hut Roloi Tumas Atohaim. Like we said, only if the Kohen became Tamei, B'tumas Sheretz Tohaim, that's where it will not help him. Tzitz Eina Maratza. But if the Kohen becomes Tamei, B'tumas Meis, L'chayra, again, according to Rabbi Yossi, then we can use the Tanach Rabbi Chia to resolve the inquiry. So the Gemara says no. That when the Tanach Rabbi Chia says that Tumas Atohaim tzitz maratza only for mace, you know what it means? It's not talking about the kohen. Maybe the kohen can never rely on it. Maybe yeah, maybe not. We can't resolve it from here. It's referring to the owner became tummy, and it's referring to a Pesach. And yes, it's referring to the owner becoming tummy on a sheretz. So when do we say that if the Oiseh Pesach became tummy, tzitz maratza only if he became tummy l'tumas mace, if it was tumas tohaim? But if the owner stuck his hand into a mound and there was a sheretz that is there no one knew about, then we don't say tzitz maratza. We said yesterday, if the owner becomes tamei and tuma sheretz, b'chlal, I don't care if he's tamei. That was a machloikis. But this Tana of Rabbi Chia holds that ain't sheichten v'zarken al tamei sheretz. And therefore, if not for tzitz maratza, even though at night he'll be allowed to eat it, but since on the 14th he has now tuma sheretz, according to this shita, the Koren Pesach may not be brought. So you would think that since it was tumas hatohaim, if it was brought, he'll be okay because tzitz maratza al tumas hatohaim. So the itzrach lama'ut, they know that the owner will have to bring Pesach sheni, because tumas hatohaim is maratza based on the tzitz, only for mace and not for the sheretz. Bottom line is, not according to any shita, this Brais of Rabbi Chia does not resolve the inquiry. Now let's understand shitas Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara Ve'ela li Rabbi Yossi. You are telling me that Rabbi Yossi holds on a biblical level that when the Zava sees a Nuri'i on day number 2, Mixas Hayom Kekuloi means that we actually consider her to already have kept one clean day. Now, yes, if a woman sees dam during any of the 11 days that come after the 7, she becomes tamei on the level of a zava. I get that. But how do you become a zava gedola? You only become a zava gedola if you see dam on 3 consecutive days. How do you have 3 consecutive days? Zava gemura. Every time she sees dam on day number 1, today is Friday, if she were to see dam on Shabbos, if she didn't see dam in the beginning of Shabbos, then mixas hayom kekuloi. And indeed answers the Gemara that according to Rabbi Yossi, Zava Gemura or a Zava Gedola is Aleph only if Sheifa'as, if she had one flow of blood that was never interrupted, so there was never a Mixas Hayom that was clean, or V'iba Yasema, even if it got interrupted, but Mixas Hayom Kekule demands that the beginning of the day should be clean. Now, we mentioned in the intro about Shiva, about Shloishim, in many areas in halacha that we actually paskin that mixas hayom kekule, we only apply it for the morning from alois hashachar onwards. Rashi learns here the Gemara and many other Rishonim that according to Rabbi Yossi, both by the Zav and by the Zava, the mixas hayom is taken the beginning of the Jewish day, which is at night after Tzeis. So if she is seeing dam that began, let's say Shkia time, or right before Shkia, and it goes throughout Bein Hashmashos into Tzeis, so she did not have the mixas hayom. She saw dam on day number 1 at the end of the day, but on day number 1, it went throughout Bein Hashmashos into Tzeis, so day number 2 did not begin clean. That's day number 2. And if the same thing repeats itself, that if at the end of day number 2, she again starts to flow blood, and it goes throughout Bein Hashmashos into day number 3, if during those periods, just twice, she sees dam, then she'll become a Zava Gedola, even according to Rabbi Yossi, because she did not have the beginning of the Yom clean. Bottom line is that we did not resolve the inquiry. Having said that, as we'll see in a moment, there's going to be another detailed question, which will be based on saying that the tzitz is maratza for the kohen. Now, I want to just remind ourselves to one thing that we mentioned in the beginning of the whole sugya of tuma dechuya, tuma hutra. Very important. The first nafkamina that we did not mention in the Gemara yet, but we'll see it over here. Like, who cares if tuma dechuya or tuma hutra? If it's completely hutra, if it's permissible, or if it's overridden. One difference will be is that if the kohanim that are present are tamei, and in a case where you say tuma, you do the avodah anyways, do you need to make an effort to find a tahar kohen? Let's speak about a korban, a avodah, a korban sibur. If tuma dechuya, even though at the end of the day you have to do the avodah, but it would be even better to do it betara. Make the effort. Make an effort to find a kohen that start. If tuma hutra, then I don't care. Okay, now let's go back to Boy Rabbi Yosef. We're speaking now about the kohen doing an avodah. Now I know that the inquiry that we had yesterday was about a korban yachid. Do we say that if a kohen who does the avodah of a korban yachid, where b'chlal there's no acceptability, we don't allow it for the kohen to be tamei, and we normally don't say tzitz maratza on the kohen. So the question was, if the kohen became tamei, but tumas meis, tumas tahaim, do we say also like halacha l'moshe misinai by the nazar, by the oiseh pesach, that tzitz maratza? That was yesterday's question. Now we're going on to not where if the kohen did avodah betuma, it's invalidated. No, we're speaking about a carbon sibur. Carbon sibur, a tamid, can be done betuma. Tuma dechoy betzibur. So kohen hameratze betamid, he's the one doing the avodah. Do we say hutra loy tuma satohaim? Now, anyways, the avodah is going to be kosher. But do we say that that tuma is completely not looked at? It's completely permissible, which means Rashi says that even if there is another kohen that is tahor, we don't even have to make an effort to go get him. Now, 1 second. We're speaking about the side that tuma dechuya. Tuma dechuya means that normally you would have to make an effort. But if the kohen that is tamei became tamei through tumas atohoim, interestingly. So do we say because of the tzitz meratza by the nazir and by the oisa pesach? So let us say that even though this kohen is tamei, even if we're going to say tuma dechuya, normally you have to look for a kohen that's not over here. Understand? They found out before he did the avodah that he's tamei through tumas atohoim. So do we say hutra lei tumas atohoim? Oy loy. And now the Gemara explains that im tim Suleiman, going back to yesterday's inquiry, that's not resolved. But im tim Suleiman, that koyin hamaratza b'karban nesayim shel nazir v'yosef pesach. Or really, it's in parentheses because this goes to any carbon sibur. If the koyin does the avodah b'tuma, the rule is the avodah is psula. But if we're going to say that if we discovered after the fact that the koyin was tamei, but he was tamei b'tuma satohoim, then we will apply this leniency based on the tzitz that hutrolei tumas atohaim. If we will be lenient in yesterday's boya, now let's come back to the new one. Kohen hamaratza b'tamid. Again, there's a kohen. He's about to do the avodah. Now we know he's tamei before he began, but he discovered that he became tamei because there was a tumas atohaim that he became aware of. So again, even if you subscribe to tuma dechuya, which means that normally you have to make an effort to find a kohen that's starred, mi amrinan that ki gemiri tumas hatohaim was only bepesach, but the tamid loy gemiri. And since if you're going to follow the side that tumas is only the choy betzibur, lechatchila, don't let him do it. B'diavad, everyone will agree that it's okay. But lechatchila, find another kohen. Oidilma, no, yalif mi pesach. And here you can lechatchila allow him to do the avoid. So amar Rabba kavochem ma b'makom shelo yotlo tuma yedua. By a pesach and a nazir, that was the Mishnah yesterday, Chevra. That if the person, the owner, the one who is registered, is tamei, no tzitz meratza, Pesach Sheni. If a nazir discovers that he was tamei before they brought his karbanos, what are you bringing karbanos for? Your whole days were discounted. Nevertheless, there is this gewaldige leniency that if their tuma was tumas atohaim, then yes, tzitz meratza. So yet hutra loy tumas atohaim. So for sure, makayim hutra loy tuma yedua. In other words, what happens if there's no kohen tar that's available? Even if tuma dechoya betzibur, when it comes to a carbon sibur, if there's no other option, if a kohen after the fact does the avoid of the tamid, it's going to be okay. So to begin with, we are much more lenient by a carbon sibur, daf pei aleph amid beis, then certainly einoy din, that if you discover before the shchita, before the Kabbalah, that this kohen who won the lottery is takatame, but the tumas atohaim, that's a hutroloi tumas atohaim. Makes a lot. It's a beautiful kavachaymer. However, on Mirei, so they tell Rabbi nisht. Now, who told you that Pesach hanois nazir tzitz maratza for tumas atohaim? We keep on saying halacha l'moishe misinai, as we'll see soon in a couple of lines. That initially the earlier Amoraim didn't know that. They discovered that. Now that we know it's halacha l'moishe misinai, so now you can't learn anything from it. You can't make a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'moishe misinai. That's a very important klal in the way you make limudim. Second line, umi daininan kal v'chomer mahalacha. Kal v'chomer is like a very logical, but that's a rule. You don't use the reason of a kal v'chomer based on the teacher cannot be a halacha l'moishe misinai, because a halacha l'moishe misinai is something that's completely beyond our understanding. It's not even alluded to in the Chumash. We have no idea why God made that rule. So if you don't understand something, you can't use logic to apply it to other areas. Maybe there's something about this halacha. There's one reasoning that we don't know yet. And if you would have known then you would not even have a kal v'chomer. V'hatanya. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. Now the gewaldige conversation back and forth. Rashi tells us what's going on over here. A nazir that has contact with a bone of a corpse, Now, a corpse gives off a very high level of tumas meis, but there is a difference between the type of contact you had with it as to how much of the corpse is needed to impart tumah. If you have only a bone of a corpse, if you touch it, mago, maso, you become tummy. But etzem of a corpse, the bone will not impart tumas oil. If you remember all the details, that in order for bones to impart tumas oil, there are so many rules. Roiv atzomois, roiv minyan, roiv binyan, roiv hakav. Remember that? And then there's an exception. Then you have the skull, then you have the spine, v'chule, v'chule. But a little fragment in the size of a barley grain from a corpse cannot give off tumas oil. Now, revi'is dam, if you have a revi'is of dam of a mace, with all the pratim, dam hanefesh, that not only is matama b'mago ubamasa, that also gives off tumas oil as well. Now, what are we talking about over here? The machloikes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva is also regarding a nazir, that the nazir had contact with a mace. Notice we discovered that when the avodah was done at the end, oops, he was tamei, and that we keep on mentioning, that if a nazir becomes tamei, he forfeits all his days of nazirus. And therefore, the karbanis that are brought at the end is irrelevant. He has to become tahir. He has to count all his days again. Now, if a nazir has contact even only with an etzem kisa'ira, halacha l'moishe misinai, that he forfeits all his days. So Rabbi Akiva went ahead and said, therefore, logically, if a nazir becomes tamei because he had halachic contact with a revi'as dam, he for sure also forfeits all of his days. And even if he brought the karbanis at the end, they're irrelevant. They did not work. So says Rabbi Eliezer to his colleague Rabbi Akiva, calling him by his name Akiva. No, the fact that a nazir loses or forfeits all of his prior days, even if he had contact only with an etzem, right? That's a halacha l'moshe misinai. Revi'as dam, you're trying to, from there, apply it to a revi'as dam, and you have a very logical kal v'chomer. Yeah, what you're saying makes sense. That etzem kisa'oida does not have the power to give off tumas oil, so it's a weaker tumah. Nevertheless, if there was maga or masa, he forfeits his days. A revi'as dam b'chlal from a mace that is able to impart tumas oil, for sure, if the nazir had halachic contact, maga or masa oil with the revi'as dam, he should forfeit his days. It's a kal v'chomer. But since the rule of etzem kisa'oida for fitting the days of the nazir is only halacha l'moshe misinai, so Rabbi Eliezer tells him, etzem kisa'oida halacha. Revi'as dam is a kal v'chomer, and there's a rule that ain't done in kal v'chomer halacha. And therefore, they are challenging Rabbi. How can you say that if the nazir is doing a tamid, even if you subscribe to Tumah D'Choy B'Tzibur, there is no need to look for another kohen if we know now that his tamid came from Tumas HaTahoim? You can't learn that Mikal V'Chomer from a nazir v'Oisa Pesach. So indeed, Elo Amar Rava, I don't have the Kal V'Chomer, but yes, I do have a Gezerah Shaveh Yalef Moy Adoi B'Pesach. In other words, just like the word Moed is written by a Pesach, and that's the whole halacha l'moshe misinai. But the rule is that even if the owner is tamei b'tumas meis during the avodah, we find this out now. Oh, but if the tumah came from tumas tahoim tzitz meratzeh, so yes, by a tamid that the Torah writes on Parshas Pinchas, moyed b'moyadoi, right? Then we have the generic at the end, Eila tasol Hashem b'moyadechem. Then yes, tzitz meratzeh, and you don't have to find to a tar. You don't have to look. You don't have to make an effort to find a tar coin. Now, tumas hatahoim gufa heicha ksiva. I know we just said halacha l'moshe misinai, but here you see that the Amoraim initially were looking for a source in the Torah, and we're speaking both about the Nazir and the Oisa Pesach. So Amar Rabbi Lazar the Amoira Amar Kra by the Nazir v'chiyamus meis olav. If a person should die, olav beside him, taiches Rabbi Lazar b'michu veres olav. It has to be apparent to him. So if there was a mace, but it was not apparent to him, it was apparent to no one, is tumas tahoim. And he finds out about it, tzitz meratzeh. Says the Gemara, Ashkechan, you, Rabbi Lazar, Nazir, what about Oisa Pesach Minolan? So Rabbi Lazar didn't have a scriptural source. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, I have a source there. That Amar Kram, Parshas Baha Aloischa, right? Ish, Kiyeh, Tamelo Nefesh, right? Oy, B'derech Rechoika, Lochem. So he says, B'derech Rechoika, Lochem. Again, Lochem means that it has to be Mimichu Veres, Lochem. You The lochem doesn't only go on the derech rechoika. I know the Gemara is quoting the pasuk from the middle. The pasuk begins kiyia lo ish, kiyia tamei lo nefesh, or le nefesh. So that's it. So the tamei nefesh has to be lochem. You need to know about it. That excludes the tumas tahaim. That person does not have to bring the Pesach Sheni. And Rab Shimon ben Lakish, right? Reish Lakish, the third opinion says, learn it from the word kidderech. Ma derech begoloi. Everyone sees the path. It's called the derech. Right, there's a shvil, but there a derech means a road. Aftuma, when will tuma during Pesach Rishon demand of you to go and bring a Pesach Sheni? Only when it's your tuma came from a source that is bigolui. Aftuma nama bigolui. Meisvei asks the Gemara against all of these three, against Rabbi Lazar and against Rabbi Yechanan and against Reish Lakish. It says in the Braisa, Ezi tumas tatohaim. How do we define tumas tatohaim? Now the words that we're seeing over here, we appreciate Rashi better. We mentioned yesterday, Tumas HaTohaim is not only the Tumah that no one ever knew at all. This is something that Rashi adds in yesterday's daf, but it's important to remember that. Tumas HaTohaim means that the corpse, the Tumah, was placed in an area that no one knew it was there for sure. Even if there was a doubt whether there was a Tumah there or not, if there was never a moment of Vada'us, that's also Tumas HaTohaim. Just to know how Rashi learns Tumas HaTohaim.
Does that differentiate between unintentional and unintentional?
This is not connected to intentional or unintentional. No, it doesn't matter. Not connected. The inquiry we have here about the kohen who's doing the Talmud, even if the kohen, no, one second. If the kohen, once it's known that there's Tumah there, so then it's no longer Tumas HaTohaim. Correct. If for sure the Tumah came about, it's more than unintentional. Let me add another detail, just a logic, if you can give a logic. Why are we saying that Tumas HaTohaim is overlooked because of the tzitz? Because we have intentional. Let me use that. And then we have shoygig. Now, throughout the Gemara, throughout Jewish law, shoygig, even though shoygig means unintentional, but there's a certain amount of culpability. Because you could have known, you would have made a bigger effort. Tumas HaTohaim is like an oinus, maybe. Tumas HaTohaim means that since no one ever knew that it was there, or no one had a certainty, so it's more than unintentional. I think that's the way to word it. It's more, so that's why after the fact, it sits as manatz. Okay, back over here. So these are the words of the Braisa. No one, not that this person never knew. Oh, very good, that's a shoygeg. No one ever knew, or no one ever knew a certainty. But hikir ba echad b'soifa olam, even if many years ago, then even though this person didn't know, that's not called Tumas HaTohaim. Ezo Tumas HaTohaim. Now, this definition, if Rabbi Lazar, if Rabbi Yechanan, if Reish Lakish are correct that the concept of Tumas HaTohaim is alluded to, is hinted to in the verses that they quoted, then we would never come to this definition. We would never come to this definition, which is a very limiting definition. According to Rabbi Lazar, that learns it by the Nazir, v'chiyamus meis olav, b'michuveres olav, then we would say, adayadahu. We would be able to be a lot more lenient. We would be able to say, the Tumah has to be apparent to him. If it was never known to him, then he should also be exempted because of Tumas HaTohaim. But we're not saying that. We're saying that it has to be a Tumah that no one knew, even someone that lives on the other end of the world. Oh, furthermore, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that learns it out from the Parshas Bahal Loischa, from the word lochem again, and we said lochem in the plural, apparent to you, b'mechoveres lochem. So then we should even be more. We should be even more liberal in applying Tumas HaTohaim. We should say ad yoda batrein. If there was only one person that knew it, right, then it should still be Tumas HaTohaim. When do we say that you cannot rely on Tumas HaTohaim? If two people knew it, if it was apparent to you in the plural. But we don't say that. We are saying Tumas HaTohaim, this leniency is only if no one ever knew for certainty. And likewise, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that says kederech. Kederech means something that's revealed. Here it's even more. We would have interpreted Tumas HaTohaim meaning that only if everyone knew about it, that's when you become Tamei. But if many people knew about it, but not everyone, it's also Tumas HaTohaim. No one defines it that way. So therefore, concludes the Gemara, Ella, really, Tumas HaTohaim, the rule, and therefore the definition, is a halacha hilchas gemidola. And it's very common that even when you have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, v'kra asmachta ba'alma, just what Yaakov asked me this last time, just to speak it out, that the Rambam in his Periscope Mishnah explains that the difference between a deoraisa versus a halacha l'Moshe Sinai is that a halacha l'Moshe Sinai has no scriptural source. Something that's alluded to in the Chumash is already called a deoraisa. And this is not the first time, but here we find something interestingly, and this really is how we are to understand the meaning of a asmachta, something that we lean on. An asmachta is not like other limudim that when there's an extra letter, and Chazal tell us that that extra letter was taka added to remind you or to teach you that law. That's a doiraisa. And asmachta means is that, so to say, when Hashem wrote these words, this was not God's intention. Eloma, now that we have a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and even here we look to find some sort of a place in the Torah that we can lean it on. So we lean it on the words lachem, we lean it on the words derech, olav. But that's called an asmachta. It still remains a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Right? Amar Marbedei Ravashi. Chayav details. Lo shanu that what? Going back to our Mishnah, that a nazir and a oisa Pesach. Turns out that they were tamei. But if they became tummy from a corpse tumah, that's known as tumah satohaim. So we're saying the great leniency. It's okay. The nazir concluded this day properly. The person who made a Pesach will not have to bring a Pesach sheni. Tzitzis meratzeh. That's eloshinoi delayla achazrikom. It's only if they discovered after the blood was sprinkled. In other words, the chi is darik dam. At that moment, they thought they are to hide him. Then shapir. The shapir is darik. As from their perspective, everything was done fine. Lechatchila they could find. What happens if someone before the Zrika Saddam, both by the Nazir and by the Pesach, they discover, oops, I'm Tamei. For the first time, they discovered that 400 years ago, someone was buried there. Then he's limiting the leniency of Tumas Atohaim, and the Gemara right away will reject this. Says the Gemara, Meisvei Nisht. Nope. It says in a Braisa, Hamaitzi Meis, if a person discovered, again, Tumas Atohaim, that some corpse was buried, Mushkav l'rachbay shel, he was buried. The length of the mace was on the width of the road, meaning that everyone who walked on this road for sure walked over the mace. If the mace is a yid, or if you don't subscribe to Shitas Rashbi, and you will hold like the others that even goyim give off tumas mace, with that now it means that everyone that walked over this road for sure was mahil al hameis, and they are tummy. Up until this discovery, no one ever knew about it. So that's Tumas Atohaim. So says the Braisa, Le Truma. If the issue is whether the kohen can eat Truma, so then the din is Tamei. It's very important. The whole dispensation of Tumas Atohaim, Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, was for the Nazir and for the Oisa Pesach, not for a kohen eating Truma. And by the way, we had a boya whether it works for a kohen. That was an inquiry. Whether it works for a kohen by a carbon yachid, whether it works for a kohen, very important. Let's come to Kol Rambam. The Rambam paskins that it also goes to a kohen that does the avodah. It also goes to this kohen that's about to do the carbon tamid. That if he became tamid b'tumas atohaim, even tumat choy b'tzibur, you don't have to find another kohen, but that's limited. That's it. You don't apply it to a truma. However, l'nazir v'oisa Pesach says the Braisa Torah. What's Torah? Because halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that's a tzitzas meratz. Now, the Braisa says, look at these words. The chol tamei v'toir is lehaba. Who? Lehaba means, let's go to the leniency, that when you're saying that someone is going to do the Pesach, that he discovered before he brought the Zrika, before anything, that he became tamei, and the Braisa says toir, it means mikanu lehaba, not only after the fact, not post facto, lechatchila, the opposite of what we just quoted, the opposite of the din of Mar Baravashi. So indeed, the Gemara says, no, we misquoted him, not we refuted him. Now we clarified. He said the opposite. Ela itmer hacher itmer amar Baravashi. That loy tema when you learn the Mishnah, that noida loy la'achazrika hu de meratza, like a b'diavad post facto, you can rely on sitz meratza by tumas atohaim. No, avol noida lefnei zrika, you might have said erroneously loy meratza. It's not that way. It's the way takat's written in the Braisa. Ella noida loy lefnei zrika, even if you find out before the zrika, it's Pesach Rishon. When you didn't find out prior to becoming tummy. When you became tummy, at that time, no one ever knew that there was a corpse there for certainty. Wow, you can bring the Korban Pesach, Baratzah. You can conclude your days of Nazirus. Beautiful. Even though you will not be allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. Okay, but we're following these opinions that say that the actual eating is not essential. Weiter. Gufa, we learned before. Let's go back to this brayso. So if the issue is regarding truma, then we say there's no dispensation of truma satohaim. Now you know that the person is tamei. The kohen may not eat truma. But if we are wondering whether this nazir can go forward with his ending his nazirus by the karbanis, or whether this Jew can bring the korban pesach. Now, obviously, if you found this out 8 days before, 7 days before, undergo the procedure of a hazosh, shlishi, ushvi. But today is the 14th, then tar lachatchila, go bring it. Now let's add details. Bamed dvarim amurim. Now we have to help up what the bamed dvarim amurim goes to. It's not consistent. Bamed dvarim amurim, that says Rashi that for the truma the kohen is tamei. That's only if now we know that for sure he walked over the mace. Because the mace was laid in the width of the path that no matter if you went to the center, if you went to the right, if you went to the left, you for sure walked over the mace. But if there's a possibility, now we discovered that maybe if you went over there in that angle, you would not have walked over the mace, then you're taught. Why? Why? Because guys, let's remember the rule. Safek tuma b'reshus rabim sfeikoi tahar. Another detail, that if there is no room that the kohen for truma is for sure tamei, that's only shematzai shalom if the corpse was found intact. Aval, if the corpse was found mishubar, broken, the body was broken or mephorik dismembered, which means that there were little areas in between the corpse, even though the chances are not that high. But if he exactly walked over there, he would not have walked over the mace, then weiter tor, because shema ben aprakam over. However, another detail in this detail, that ubakavet, if the corpse was in a grave, that means in a hole in the ground that was excavated for him to lay there, for the body to lay there, then it doesn't make a difference whether the body is intact or not. Because of the rule that shahakever, the grave itself, combines the body, and no matter on what any part of the kever, even if physically there was no corpse underneath you, but you walked over a kever, we'll leave that more details for another time. Another bamed dvarim amurim, that what? That you may assume that you walked in between the limbs because of this rule that's safek, tuma, b'reshus harabim, chevra halkop, sfeikoi, tahar. That's only b'mahalach b'raglov, when you were walking upright, you had nothing on your back. So therefore we say, yeah, it's possible that you walked in between the parts. Aval ton, but if you were loaded with a burden, or if you were riding rachuv, in that position, you're bent over and you're not walking straight, then we say you're tamei. Lefisha mahalach b'raglov, indeed, efshed, and efshed is enough, but it has to be a real efshed. Oh, it's when we're speaking about a doubt, is it a percent issue? Suffix, sveka. It's suffix enough that the side shelo yiga v'lo yayel is possible. But if a person is torn or achuv, so then he's, you're walking bent over. Then even though you can always argue it's not 1,000% you walked over it, but halachically it's not called this type of doubt. Halachically we say it's impossible. Shelo yiga v'lo yayel. Furthermore, now we're jumping. This, forget about the kohen. Now we're going to the nazir. Now we're going to the oisa pesach. That the nazir and the oisa pesach can bring their karbanos is betuhumas tohaim. Aval betuma yedua tamei. And here the Braisa defines the ezehi tumas hatohaim kol shalika va'echad asayfa oilam. No one ever knew with certainty. Not that this guy didn't know. No one ever knew. It's much more than the shoygig. So then you can't expect of him. Then ein zeh tumas hatohaim. Furthermore, let's define tohaim. Tohaim literally means in the depths of the earth, which is just a practical reason why no one would ever know. But it doesn't have to be all the way buried in the virgin soil underneath the ground. What happens if there is a pile of straw, but no one ever knew that, for example, there were a sheretz is decomposing in there. But a matzoi, tamen beteven, you find it concealed. It has to be tohaim. It has to be completely out of sight. If it's in straw, or if it's ba'afed in earth, or if it's bitzroides in pebbles, even if they are a mound above the ground, that's also called tohaim. Which don't touch tohaim literally. As long as no one ever knew. But what happens if there is a source of tuma that's in water? Now, in water, yeah, the naked eye normally cannot see it, but water is noiga. Water is see-through. It's concealed but not hidden. Like there's different levels of concealment, right? Klipas noiga and shalosh klipos hatameis. If it's in water or in darkness, it's in darkness. So you can't see because it's dark. Or benekike hasloim, it's in a crevice in a boulder. So at first glance, you won't see it, but if you would look at it from that angle, you would see it. Ein ze tumas hatohaim. Even though it's not readily apparent, but you can't halachically say that dust is concealed. And now this is the beginning of the and now we appreciate this ending of the statement. So what are we excluding? We are either excluding tumaziva, or we are excluding sheretz for the kohen. That was something that, again, in the Gemara, that was a boy that was left unresolved. We have time. Let's begin the new sugya. Guys, it's going from technically challenging to very easy. It's good to end on very easy, to be inspired, easy. Emertz Hashem Sunday morning. Guys, we're speaking about a carbon yachid. The owner was tahir, the carbon is brought, and part of the animal becomes tummy, like any other psulei hamugdashim. So let's forget about, let's shelve whether the person fulfilled. It's not relevant whether the person has to bring a Pesach Sheni or whether not, whether he can eat it, whether not. No, but I want to know something else. Where exactly do you burn that part of the kachim? So nitma, like this. If the entire carbon, the entire carcass became tamei, now, by the way, just technically, that would always only happen if there was a mesa. There was real negligence here. Why would the whole animal become tamei? Oh. Or Rabbi says the Mishnah, Sorfin oisai lifnei habira. Pesach can be eaten where? Can be eaten in the whole Yerushalayim. And like we spoke out in the intro, the rule is that psulei hamikdashim, that has to be burnt. Where does it have to be burnt? In the location where, had it remained tarred, it would have been eaten there. Pesach can be consumed in the whole Yerushalayim. So you would think you can burn it in the whole Yerushalayim. So says the Mishnah, you have to burn it dafkan harabayis, lifnei habir, in front of the palace. And as we spoke out, that when you burn something on harabayis, there's a certain benefit that you get, and that is that you don't need to use your own private wood, but you may use atzei hamarach. Okay. And we're going to find it in the Gemara. Why does it have to be burnt lifnei habira? Why can't you burn it on your backyard? It's kachekalam. We'll see that later. Next, nitma ma'utai, if only a little part of the meat became tamei. Similarly, whenever you have noisar, so every animal has a expiration time after which, first of all, you're not allowed for that part to be in the world up until that time. It has to be consumed prior. But if it became noisar, you have to burn it. So where do you burn it? Soifin oisai bechatzroi seim. If it's kachei kalim, you can burn it in your backyard. Oyal gagoi seim, or on your roofs, ma'atzei atzmon. But you also, harabayis is Yerushalayim. If you burn something on harabayis, you may use the atzei hamaracha. So the Mishnah says, Ki'ilu, in a derogatory way, that hatzai konim, that the misers mentioned was an enkarig, people that are trying not to spend their own money. So even though they knew that if it's only a mute, or if it's nicer, they are allowed to burn it anywhere in Yerushalayim, they would go and they would burn it lifnei abira, in order b'shvil leihanois ma'atzei hamaracha. Don't eat at home, eat in the kiddush and shul, chaparayim, don't spend money. So says the Gemara, let's just one line. So why is it that if it's nitma sholem, the first line of the Mishnah, or nitma rubai, you don't have an option of burning it in your backyard? You have to burn it lifnei abira. So Amar Rab Yosef Rab Chanina kedei levaishon. Yeah, why did the whole animal become tamei? There was some negligence. We want for everyone to see that your carbon became tamei, and that busha will hopefully be a kapara, and it would be a preventative measure that other people would take more caution, not allowing the carbon to become tamei. We'll stop over here. God willing, to be continued.
Rabbi, these guys with the whole carbon being burned, are they making it up in Pesach Sheni, or they're making it up?
Okay, very good. So let's go back to what we learned a few daf ago. According to Rabbi Yeshua, according to Rab Nassan, they are the ones that say that even though Ikar Pesach la'achila ba, but after the fact, achila is only a mitzvah, not le'ikuva. Then, according to the other Tanoim that don't agree with that, that they hold that the Pesach has to be consumed. So if none of it was consumed, then it's nicht good.
But if even a miyut is tamei, they still can't eat any of it, right?
No. If a miyut is tamei, as long as what remained is enough to give every of the registered people a kazayas, then everyone ate.
Okay.
No, during the avodah, everything was good. Then it became tamei. And by the way, even in Ruba, if Ruba became tamei, but if there was only 5 people on it, they're going to bring a chagiga dalit. They were not planning to, but now you got to bring it, and they're almost satisfied and don't have their kazayas, and they're good.